Okay, so good day again, class. So today we'll be continuing our discussion sa introduction to taxation. So last time we stopped at the limitations of taxation power, specifically yung constitutional limitations. So let's continue at the stages of the exercise of taxation power. So we have two stages. We have your levy or imposition, which is the enactment of a tax law by Congress, and it's called impact of taxation or legislative act in taxation. The next one is assessment and collection, which is to refer to as the incidence of taxation or the administrative act of taxation. Okay, so yung sa levy or imposition, it is the enactment of a tax law by Congress, diba? So sa Congress, we have it is composed of two bodies. We have the House of Representatives and the Senate. So the enactment of a tax law, it should always, or enactment of a tax bill, it should always originate exclusively. It should always originate from the House of Representatives. Okay, so dapat hindi sa Senate ang nag-originate niya, pero ang Senate pwede sila mag-amend ng mga tax bills na nag-originate sa House of Representatives. So we have what are the matters of legislative discretion para sa exercise of taxation. We have yung determining of the object of taxation, setting the tax rate or amount to be collected, determining the purpose for the levy, which must be public use, kind of tax to be imposed, and others. So yun yung mga din-discuss or yun yung mga kailangan ng legislative act. Well, yung sa assessment and collection naman, ito na yung yung parang action. So dito na tayo nagko-collect ng mismong tax. So next is the situs of taxation. So situs rule serves as frames of reference encouraging whether the tax object is within or outside the tax jurisdiction of the taxing authority. Kung dito natin i-determine kung saan yung saan itatax ang isang object, right? So for example, yung business tax. So under sa business tax, yung situs niya is where the business is conducted. Okay, so for example, we have A, tapos meron siyang business na eatery. So si A is nasa abroad siya. So even though nasa abroad si A, kung yung business niya is na within the Philippines, syempre the business tax should be collected within the Philippines, right? So yun. Next is the income tax, situs on the services. Okay, so yung situs naman ng income tax is where they are rendered. Syempre, kung saan tayo nag-render ng services natin, right? So, for example, empleyado tayo sa isang private company sa Manila, edi sa Manila yung pagtataksan natin. 3, income tax situs on sales of goods. Okay, so in this case, sales naman ito. Yung number 2 is services. So, kung sales naman, the place of sale. Okay, so even though iba yung mismong business, iba yung place ng mismong business, yung mismong sale is naganap sa isang place, then doon natin sila matatax. Okay? So number 4, property tax situs. Okay, so yung syempre under sa property tax, yung location ng mismong property. Right? Hindi naman natin ma-move yung property. Number 5, personal tax situs. Okay, so yung under sa personal tax, yung situs niya is sa place of residence ng person. Okay? So for example, meron tayong isang non-resident citizen. So for example, isang Chinese. So if a Chinese is residing within the Philippines, he is subject to personal tax kasi nga yung residence niya is within the Philippines even though hindi siya taga-Philippines originally. So yun, ganun yung situs of taxation. So here we have the other fundamental doctrines in taxation. We have the Marshall Doctrine, which states that the power to tax involves the power to destroy. Okay? So taxation can be used as an instrument of police power. So pwede natin gawin ay kahit na taxation and police power are both inherent powers of the state, we can use taxation as an instrument of police power. We can use taxation to prohibit or to prohibit or what's the term, discourage certain businesses or activities. So for example, imposition of excessive tax on cigarettes. So kung gusto ng government na i-discourage ang cigarettes, they can impose excessive tax on the said business para ma-discourage ang mga businesses na to na mag-continue, right? It does not include the power to destroy if it is used solely for the purpose of raising revenue. Okay, so it's just dependent on the purpose or the intention of the government sa tax nila. Kung ang purpose nila is solely to raise revenue, hindi siya as an instrument of police power, syempre. It just depends on the intent of the government. Number 2, Holmes Doctrine. Taxation power is not the power to destroy, well, the court said. So, even medyo counteract sila, even kahit na sinabi sa Marshall Doctrine na the power to tax involves the power to destroy, under naman sa Holmes Doctrine, the taxation power is not the power to destroy, well, the court sits. Okay? Includes the creation of eco-zones with tax holidays and provision of incentives. So, taxation may be used to build or encourage beneficial activities or industries by the grant of tax incentives. So, nandito ito includes creation of eco-zones with tax holidays and provisions of incentives. So, kabaliktaran ng sa number 1, we can also use the government can also use taxation to encourage certain businesses in the form of tax incentives. Okay? So, even though the Marshall Doctrine and the Holmes Doctrine appear to contradict each other, both are actually employed in practice. A good manifestation of the Holmes Marshall Doctrine is the imposition of excessive tax on cigarettes, while application of Holmes Doctrine include the creation of eco-zones with tax holidays and provision of incentives such as Omnibus Investment Code and the Barangay Microbusiness Enterprise Law. Okay, so even though contradicting silang dalawa, they are both performed in practice. Number 3, prospectivity of tax laws. Tax laws are generally prospective in operation. An ex post facto law or a law that retroacts is prohibited by the Constitution. Okay, so exceptionally, income tax laws may operate retrospectively if so intended by the Congress under certain justifiable conditions. So, dapat justifiable yung condition for an income tax law to take effect retroactively. Okay, so when we say retroactively kasi, upon implementing the said tax law, it affects even those businesses or even those mga naganap na before implementation. So, na-affect yung before man nag-implement, kahit na before hindi sila na-affect, after na ipasa yung certain tax law, na-affect sila. So, ganun yung retroactive. So, nasasali pati yung past. Pero under prospective, na-affect lang yung present and future. Okay, so ganun yung ibig sabihin ng prospective. So, kung meron mang tayong, let's say, tax law na na-implement, it is generally prospective in operation. So, meaning, for example, let's say before yung tax on, let's say, tax on selling liquor, tax on selling alcohol, okay? So, yung tax on selling alcohol before is, let's say, 2%. Tapos, merong bagong tax law na nag-state na yung bagong tax sa mga nagbebenta ng liquor is 5%. So, yung 5% nag-take effect at the present and the future sales ng mga businesses. So, hindi siya nagte-take effect sa mga past sales ng mga liquor businesses. Pero, yun yung ibig sabihin kapag prospective. Kung retroactive naman, kung retroactive yung effect ng isang tax law, it means that past sales are also affected by the 5% na tax. So, kailangan nila magbayad ng additional payments, right? So, ganun yung ibig sabihin ng retroactive. Pero it is prohibited by the Constitution, generally. For non-compensation or set-off, tax is not a debt since it is not subject to set-off. Okay? So, exceptions, taxpayers' claims has already become due and demandable. Case of obvious overpayments of taxes and local taxes. So, taxpayers cannot delay payment of tax to wait for the resolution of a lawsuit involving his pending claim against the government. So, ibig sabihin, kung meron man kayong claim under sa government, kung meron man kayong claim, kung meron man kayong ine-expect na ma-receive from the government, hindi mo yun pwedeng gawing reason para magbayad ng tax, para hindi magbayad ng tax. So, for example, meron kang babayarang income tax. Sasabihin mo, hindi muna ako magbabayad ng income tax kasi meron pa akong hinihintay na ma-receive from the government. And you cannot do that because it is not, tax is not subject to set-off or compensation. Except for this, yung sinabi, yung tatlong ito. Number 5, non-assignment of taxes. Tax obligations cannot be transferred to another entity by contract. So, self-explanatory, hindi mo pwede may transfer yung dapat mong bayaran sa ibang entity. 6, imprescriptibility in taxation. Prescription is the lapsing of a right due to passage of time. So, this is the definition of prescription, the lapsing of a right. So, meaning parang meron siyang expiration due to the passage of time. Tax prescribes if not collected within 5 years from the date of its assessment. So, kung na-assess na and hindi pa nako-collect, if hindi pa nako-collect within 5 years, the tax prescribes. In the absence of assessment, tax prescribes if not collected by judicial action within 3 years from the date the return is required to be filed. Taxes due from the taxpayer who did not file a return or those who filed fraudulent returns do not prescribe. Okay, so just read this. Basically, self-explanatory naman. 7, doctrine of estoppel. Any misrepresentation made by one party towards another who relied therein in good faith will be held true and binding against that person who made the misrepresentation. The government is not subject to estoppel. The error of any government employee does not bind the government. It is held that the neglect or omission of government officials entrusted with the collection of taxes should not be allowed to bring harm or detriment to the interests of the people. Also, erroneous applications of the law by public officers do not block subsequent correct applications of the same. So, it just means that the error of any government employee does not bind the government. So, even though may kamali ang mga employee in, let's say, assessing your tax, it does not mean that it does not bind the government. So, it is not an excuse para hindi ka na magbayad, right? So, ganun. Judicial non-interference. Courts are not allowed to issue injunction against government's pursuit to collect tax, as this would unnecessarily defer tax collection. So, this is under the lifeblood doctrine. Diba, courts are not allowed nga na mag-prevent mag-intervene sa pag-collect ng tax ng government. Okay, kasi nga, under sa lifeblood doctrine, the tax is necessary for the government to function. 9. Strict construction of tax laws. Taxation is the rule, exemption is the exemption. So this is the phrase. There's no room for interpretation, there's only room for application. When taxation laws are vague, the doctrine of strict legal construction is observed. Okay, so ito lang. Ito yung importante. So vague tax laws construed against the government and in favor of the taxpayer. While sa vague exemption laws construed against the taxpayer in favor of the government. It means no exemption law construed strictly against the taxpayer in accordance with the lifeblood doctrine. Okay? So, yung vague tax laws lang, ibig sabihin yun, vague tax laws means no tax law. Obligations arising from law is not presumed. Okay, so kung vague man yung tax law, it is in favor of the taxpayer. So, hindi siya pre-presume na meron tayong babayaran kapag vague man yung tax law. While kapag vague yung exemption laws, kung meron bang vague na tax exemption laws, it is construed against the taxpayer naman. It means that under vague exemption laws, it's assumed na hindi makaka-avail ng exemption yung taxpayer. So it is in favor of the government. Okay, so next is the double taxation. Okay, so double taxation occurs when the same taxpayer is taxed twice by the same tax jurisdiction for the same thing. Okay, so kung doble-doble na yung binabayaran mong tax, right? Or if you are subject to multiple taxes, it is called double taxation. Okay, so we have the primary element, which is the same object. Secondary element is same type of tax, same purpose of tax, same taxing jurisdiction, and same tax period. So we have types of double taxation. We have direct double taxation, meaning all elements of double taxation exist for both imposition. So this is discouraged because it is oppressive and burdensome to taxpayers. So an example of direct double taxation, an income tax of 10% on monthly sales and a 2% income tax on the annual sales. So imagine mo, kung yung sales mo is nagbabayad ka na nga ng 10% on your monthly sales, tapos meron ka pang binabayarang 2% for your annual sales. So that is now double taxation. That is direct double taxation. Kasi it is same object, yung mismong sales mo, same type of tax, which is the income sales tax. Same purpose of tax. So purpose niya, yun nga, yung maano yung sales, matax yung sales. Same taxing jurisdiction. So same yung nagtatax, and same tax period. So the same period. So within 1 year, right? Okay, so wait lang. And then, okay, so the next type of double taxation is indirect double taxation, which means at least one of the secondary elements of double taxation is not common for both imposition. So this is actually prevalent in practice. Unlike direct double taxation na discouraged, indirect double taxation is actually seen in practice. So examples, the national government levies business tax on the sales or gross receipts of business, while the local government levies business tax upon the same sales or receipts. So as you can see from that example, magkaiba yung nagtatax. The national government yung isa, while the local government naman yung nag-i-impose ng business tax sa ikalawa. Next, the national government collects income tax from a taxpayer on his income, while the local government collects community tax upon the same income. Okay? So this again, magkaiba yung nagko-collect, the national government and the local government. Magkaiba din yung type of tax. Income yung isa, community tax naman yung isa. So even though even though the same yung same of object na tinatax, magkaiba naman yung type of tax. Magkaiba din yung nagtatax. Next, the Philippine government taxes foreign income of domestic corporation and resident citizens, while foreign government also taxes the same income. So that is called international double taxation. Kapag ang isang business is meron siyang income from outside the Philippines. So kapag meron siyang income from outside the Philippines, it is taxed both in the Philippines and the foreign nation. So dalawa yung nation na nagtatax. That is international double tax. So yun. So how can double taxation be minimized? So provision of tax exemption. Only one tax law is allowed to apply to the tax object, while the other tax law exempts the same tax object. So this is one way. Next, allowing foreign tax credit. Tax payments in the foreign tax law is deductible against the tax due of the domestic tax law. Okay. C, allowing reciprocal tax treatment. Provisions in tax law. Tax laws imposing a reduced tax rate or even exemptions if the country or of the foreign taxpayer also give the same treatment to Filipino non-residents therein. So, this is in connection sa last example natin na kapag merong income from outside the Philippines ang isang business, pwede silang mag-allow ng reciprocal tax treatment yung Philippines na kapag sa foreign nation is binibigyan sila ng exemption sa Filipino non-residents doon, dito sa Philippines binibigyan din natin ng reduced tax rates or even exemptions. D, entering into treaties or bilateral agreements. Countries may stipulate for a lower tax rate for their residents if they engage in transactions that are taxable by both of them. So this is agreements between nations na to. So escape from taxation. Available to the taxpayer to limit or even avoid the impact of taxation. So what are the ways in which we can escape from tax? So we have two categories: those that result to loss of government revenue and those that do not result to loss of government revenue. So under sa nagre-result ng loss of government revenue, we have tax evasion, tax avoidance, and tax exemption. While those that do not result to loss is shifting, capitalization, and transformation. So let's discuss first yung first category. So under tax evasion, this is also known as tax dodging. Refers to any act or trick that tends to illegally reduce or avoid the payment of tax. Okay, so example, this can be achieved by understate natin yung income natin. So for example, 100,000 yung income natin, pero ang linalagay ng nating income is, let's say, 50,000 lang. So that is a form of tax evasion. Pwede din nating hindi mag-declare ng income. Pwede din na i-overstate natin yung expenses natin para mas lumiit yung binabayaran nating tax. So those are forms of tax evasions. Next is tax avoidance, also known as tax minimization. Refers to any act or trick that reduces or totally escapes taxes by any legally permissible means. Okay, so example naman nito, selection and execution of transactions that would expose taxpayer to lower taxes. Another example, maximizing tax options, tax carryovers or tax credits. And last is careful tax planning. So unlike sa tax evasion, yung tax avoidance, this is legal means ito. While sa tax evasion, this is it tends to be illegal, right? Next is tax exemption, also known as tax holiday. Refers to the immunity, privilege, or freedom from being subject to a tax which others are subject to. So under sa tax exemption, under sa tax avoidance, inaano lang natin, parang mini-minimize lang natin yung binabayaran nating tax. While sa tax exemption, we are actually immune or we are free from being subject to a tax. All forms of tax exemptions can be revoked by Congress, except those granted by the Constitution and those granted under contracts. Okay? So, we have the next category, yung those that do not result to loss of government revenue. First is shifting, transferring tax burden to other taxpayers. This is common with business taxes, where taxes imposed on business revenue can be shifted or passed on to customers. So we have different forms of shifting. We have forward, backward, and onward. Forward is forward shifting. This is shifting of tax which follows the normal flow of distribution. So this follows the normal flow of distribution from manufacturer to wholesalers to retailers to consumers. So ganon. Common with essential commodities and services such as foods and fuel. Backward shifting, this is the reverse of forward, which means that backward shifting is common with non-essential. This is common with non-essential commodities where buyers have considerable market power and commodities with numerous substitute products. And onward shifting is any tax shifting in the distribution channel that exhibits forward or backward shifting. Okay, so instead yung shifting kasi, instead of us paying directly, we are actually transferring the tax burden to the other taxpayers. So, ganun lang yun. Next is capitalization, adjustments of the value of an asset caused by changes in tax rate. This is a form of backward shifting of tax. And last is transformation, elimination of waste or losses by the taxpayer to form savings to compensate for the tax imposition or increase in taxes. Okay. Okay, so next is tax amnesty. Okay, so malapit na tayo matapos. Tax amnesty, general pardon granted by the government for erring taxpayer to give them a chance to reform and enable them to have a fresh start, to be part of society with a clean slate. So this is absolute forgiveness or waiver by the government on its right to collect and is retrospective in application. Covers both civil and criminal liabilities, conditional upon the taxpayer paying government of a portion of the tax. Okay, so ito, parang pino-forgive tayo ng government for yung mga ginawa natin, like non-paying of taxes. Pero it is conditional upon taxpayer paying the government of a portion of the tax. So normally, tax amnesty, it is granted kung kung nagbabayad naman kayo ng portion of the tax. Hindi kayo pinapatawad, hindi kayo pinapatawad kung di pinapatawad yung buong liability. Tax condonation, forgiveness of the tax obligation of a certain taxpayer under certain justifiable grounds, also referred to as tax remission, construed against the taxpayer and in favor of the government, covers civil liabilities of the taxpayer, applies prospectively to any unpaid balance of the tax, hence the portion already paid by the taxpayer will not be refunded. Requires no payment. Okay? So, ano ba yung difference niya nung amnesty and condonation? Amnesty covers both civil and criminal liabilities, while sa condonation, it only covers civil liabilities. Amnesty operates retrospectively, meaning even past violations has no effect, while condonation applies prospectively, meaning only the present and future balances of the tax is forgiven. So, under sa condonation, any portion na binayaran na ng taxpayer, it is not refundable. Amnesty is also conditional upon the taxpayer paying the government portion of tax, wherein the condonation requires no payment. So, ganun. Those are the differences between the tax amnesty and tax condonation. So, yun, tapos na yung discussion natin for the introduction to taxation. So, yeah, thank you for listening, class, and see you again next time.